I had baked his favorite pie, just like I did when he was a boy. I wanted to see my grandchildren laugh, to sit at the table I once thought would always be mine too. But instead, I sat in silence, rejected, alone, humiliated. I thought that was the end of my story. But what I discovered next changed everything. I was born and raised in Nevada, in a little town most people would forget if they blinked while driving through. My life wasn't glamorous, not by any means, but it was filled with something far more valuable than money: love. When I married my husband, I thought we had forever. We didn't. Life had its cruel way of testing me early. Cancer took him from me when our boy Daniel was only 9 years old. Losing my husband felt like losing half of myself. But I didn't have time to collapse. I had a little boy depending on me. My grief had to wait. I rolled up my sleeves and worked. 2 jobs, sometimes 3. I cleaned houses during the day and took shifts at the diner at night. Every cent I earned, I thought of Daniel's future: shoes for school, food on the table, a roof over our heads. And whenever I tucked him in at night, even if I was bone-tired, I'd whisper, "You are my reason." And he would smile, drowsy-eyed, and whisper back, "I'll take care of you one day." Mama? Those words kept me going for decades. Daniel grew up smart, determined, and handsome. I was proud of him in ways words can't explain. When he graduated college, the first in our family, I cried so hard I embarrassed him in front of his friends. But I didn't care. Every sacrifice, every aching bone in my body from scrubbing floors and standing long hours, it all felt worth it in that moment. When he met Melissa, I tried to open my arms to her. I wanted a daughter-in-law I could love as my own. I wanted my son's wife to be my friend, my family. And at first, Melissa smiled sweetly. She called me Mom in those early months, brought me flowers on my birthday, even asked me for old family recipes. I thought I'd been blessed twice over, but small cracks appeared, little things. The first time she came into my house, she wrinkled her nose and said, "It smells old in here." I laughed it off, but it stung. When I offered her a handmade quilt for their wedding, she smiled politely and whispered to Daniel when she thought I couldn't hear, "We'll just store it somewhere." I told myself it was just differences between generations. I'd grown up in a world where people cherished handmade things. Maybe hers was different. Still, I ignored the red flags. I wanted Daniel happy, so I smiled through the little jabs. I told myself she'd soften with time, that maybe once children came along, she'd see me differently. When my first grandchild was born, my heart nearly burst. A baby girl with Daniel's dark hair and my husband's deep eyes. Holding her, I felt my husband close again. I felt whole. But even in that moment, Melissa made sure I knew my place. She snatched the baby back quickly, saying, "Careful, she's fragile." As though I hadn't raised a child myself, as though my hands, the very hands that raised Daniel, were unworthy of holding my own granddaughter. The visits grew less frequent. Invitations to family dinners came with conditions. "Maybe just once a month, Mom. Melissa needs space." I swallowed the hurt over and over because I didn't want to lose Daniel. I told myself if I just stayed patient, if I just kept showing love, Melissa would eventually let me in. But instead, the wall between us grew higher. There were times when I caught Daniel glancing at me with guilt in his eyes, times when he wanted to defend me, I could tell. But Melissa's grip was strong. She controlled the tone of the house. And my son, my boy who once promised to take care of me, chose silence instead of standing up for me. One evening, I cooked a full meal for them. Hours of work. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, cornbread, and peach cobbler. Daniel's favorites. I wanted them to feel loved. Melissa walked in, looked at the table, and said, "Oh no, this is all carbs and sugar. We can't eat this." She scraped half of it straight into the trash. I stood there frozen, humiliated, while Daniel shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. My heart cracked that night. Still, I told myself, endure. for Daniel, for the grandchildren. I baked pies, I sent gifts, I tried calling. Sometimes, days went by with no answer. When I did get through, Melissa would pick up and say, "We're busy right now, maybe later," before hanging up. Later never came. The night I got that text, I was sitting with a warm apple pie in my lap. The smell of cinnamon filled my little kitchen. I'd been so excited to bring it over, to see my grandchildren's faces light up when they saw me. And then, my phone buzzed. "You're not welcome tonight. My wife wants space." No explanation, no apology, just cold, cutting words. I stared at the screen, my chest heavy, my hands trembling. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. How had it come to this? How had my boy, the boy who once clung to my hand, the boy who whispered promises to protect me, become the man who shut me out with a single text? I thought I had already endured the worst of Melissa's cruelty. I thought I had swallowed every insult, every humiliation, every dismissal. But what I discovered next changed everything. I wish I could tell you that text was the worst of it, that things improved, that my son came to his senses. But the truth is, it only got worse, much worse. After that message, I stopped hearing from them for weeks at a time. My calls went unanswered. My texts stayed unread. On the rare occasions Daniel did pick up, Melissa's voice hovered in the background, sharp and impatient, urging him to hang up, and he would. One afternoon, desperate to see my grandchildren, I drove over to their house unannounced. I told myself I just wanted to drop off a bag of toys I'd bought, nothing more. When I pulled into the driveway, I could hear the children's laughter from the backyard. It pulled at my heart. I walked up and knocked on the door, smiling, eager to see them. Melissa opened it. Her smile was venomous. "Oh, it's you," she said flatly. "I just came to drop these off," I stammered, holding up the bag. "For the kids." Her eyes flicked to the toys, then back to me with disdain. "You can leave them here. They don't need you showing up uninvited. It confuses them." "Confuses them?" I asked, shocked. "I'm their grandmother." She leaned in, her voice a whisper laced with poison. "Exactly. And they don't need an old woman filling their heads with your outdated nonsense." I felt my stomach twist. Before I could respond, Daniel appeared behind her. For a moment, I hoped he'd defend me, but he wouldn't even meet my eyes. "Mom," he said quietly, almost rehearsed, "it's not a good time." And then Melissa shut the door in my face. I stood there, clutching the bag of toys, listening to the muffled sounds of my grandchildren laughing inside, just yards away, but out of reach. That night, I cried harder than I had in years. But Melissa wasn't finished. Not long after, my church hosted a community potluck. I baked 3 pies, my specialty. People loved them. As I set them on the table, proud to share something with the community, Melissa appeared with Daniel and the children. My heart leapt when I saw them. But before I could greet them, Melissa spoke loudly, loud enough for half the room to hear. "Daniel, don't let the kids eat that. You know how unhealthy her cooking is. Sugar, butter, fat. She doesn't care about health. No wonder." She trailed off, her eyes raking over me. A cruel smirk tugged at her lips. "No wonder she looks the way she does." A hush fell over the room. I stood frozen, humiliated, every eye in the hall burning into me. My pies, once a symbol of love, suddenly felt like weapons used against me. Daniel shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. He gathered the children and walked away as though nothing had happened. I wanted to disappear. The final straw came not long after, when I discovered something that left me breathless. My late husband had left behind a small piece of land, a modest farmhouse on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, but it was ours. I had always thought of it as part of my legacy for Daniel, something he could one day share with his children. One afternoon, I went to check the property records. I don't even know why. Call it instinct. What I found made my knees buckle. The deed had been quietly transferred to Daniel and Melissa, without my knowledge, without my permission. I stormed to their house that evening, shaking with fury. When Melissa opened the door, she smirked as though she had been expecting me. You took it," I stammered. "The farmhouse. How could you? That was mine, your father's and mine." Melissa folded her arms, her eyes cold. "Correction. It was yours. Now it's ours. Daniel thought it was time we put it to good use. You're too old to manage property. We'll make better use of it." I turned to Daniel, my voice breaking. "Daniel, tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't go behind my back." But he wouldn't look at me. His silence was louder than any words. My voice rose. "I sacrificed everything for you. I worked myself to the bone so you could have a future. And this is how you repay me? By stealing from me?" Melissa laughed, a sharp, cruel laugh. "Stealing? Oh no, think of it as streamlining. You don't need it, and we do. Simple as that." Tears blurred my vision. I could hardly breathe. My own son, my flesh and blood, standing there letting his wife strip me of not only my dignity, but of my husband's memory, my legacy, my future. "Get out, Mom," Daniel finally said, his voice low but firm. "You're making a scene." Making a scene. I stumbled out into the night. My heart shattered into pieces so sharp I thought they might cut me from the inside. But the worst part wasn't the betrayal of the property. It wasn't the humiliation in front of others. It wasn't even Melissa's sharp tongue. It was Daniel. Daniel, who once clung to my hand, whispering promises of forever. Daniel, who once said he'd protect me. Daniel, who now chose silence over me. That was the true betrayal. I reached my car and sat there in the dark, gripping the steering wheel, my body shaking with rage and grief. For years I had told myself to endure, to be patient, to keep loving, no matter the pain. But in that moment, something inside me snapped. Melissa thought she had won. She thought she had silenced me, erased me, humiliated me. She had no idea what she had just awakened. And Daniel, my sweet boy, he was about to learn that a mother's love may be endless, but so is her fury when betrayed. Because I wasn't going to fade quietly into the night. No, I was going to rise. And what I discovered next gave me the perfect way to do it. After that night at Daniel's house, I thought I had nothing left. I drove home in silence, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. When I walked into my little kitchen, the smell of the apple pie still lingered in the air. The same pie I had baked with so much love earlier that day. I hadn't even touched it. I slid down to the floor, my back against the counter, and sobbed until my body ached. For years I had endured Melissa's cutting remarks. I had swallowed her insults. I had pretended not to notice Daniel's silence. But this was different. They had taken from me, not just love, not just dignity. They had taken a piece of my life, my husband's memory, our land, the farmhouse I had cherished as part of our family's history. I stayed in that state for days, the blinds closed, phone unanswered, food untouched. Every corner of the house seemed to whisper my failure. I saw Daniel as a boy in every photograph, his smile, his promise, his hand in mine. And then the cruel reality of the man he had become hit me again and again, like a wave determined to drown me. I thought maybe they were right. Maybe I was too old, too useless. Maybe the best thing I could do was quietly fade away, let them live their lives without me. But something happened one morning, something small, something that saved me. I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at my cold cup of coffee, when I heard a knock at the door. It was my neighbor, Evelyn. She was in her late 60s like me, but full of energy and sass. She held a basket of muffins and smiled. "I haven't seen you in days," she said, placing the basket down. "What's going on, darling? You look like you've been through hell." At first, I tried to brush it off, but Evelyn had known me too long. The words spilled out of me like a flood. The text, the rejection, the humiliation, the stolen farmhouse. I poured my heart out to her, my voice shaking with every sentence. When I finished, Evelyn sat back in her chair, her face dark with anger. "Those two snakes," she muttered. "And Daniel, shame on him. Shame." She leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "But listen to me, you are not done. Do you hear me? You're stronger than you know, and you still have that fire in you." I shook my head. "What fire? They've taken everything." "Not everything," Evelyn said. "Not yet. You still have that farmhouse in you, don't you? Tell me, what do you know about what's happening out there lately?" I frowned. "Happening?" Evelyn smirked. "The county's been talking about redevelopment, grants for restoring old properties, turning them into community spaces. They're paying people to fix up land. I bet Melissa and Daniel don't know a thing about it. But you do now." Her words hit me like a lightning strike. Redevelopment, grants, opportunities, the farmhouse. I had thought of it as stolen, as gone forever. But Evelyn was right. If the county was investing in old properties, then maybe, just maybe, that little farmhouse wasn't just a relic. It was leverage. It was power. I spent the next weeks in research. The county clerk's office, the library, endless nights on the computer Evelyn lent me. I discovered that the farmhouse, though transferred to Daniel and Melissa, was still tied up in probate complications. My name lingered on some of the old tax filings. Legally, it wasn't as simple as Melissa thought, and that was my opening. But even more than the farmhouse, I realized something bigger. I wasn't alone. The community, my neighbors, my church friends, even the families at the diner where I once worked, they all remembered me. They all valued me. When Evelyn started telling people what Melissa had done, the outrage spread like wildfire. How could they treat her that way? People muttered. After everything she did for Daniel? One evening, I walked into the church social hall for the first time in weeks. Heads turned. People clapped me on the back, hugged me, whispered encouragement. I had been hiding, convinced I was forgotten. But I wasn't forgotten. I was seen. That night, I went home, sat on my porch under the Nevada stars, and felt something I hadn't in a long time. Power. For the first time since that cruel text message, I realized I didn't have to beg for Daniel's love. I didn't have to bow to Melissa's cruelty. I didn't have to be invisible. I could fight back. Not with shouting, not with fists, not even with bitter words, with something far stronger. Patience, planning, precision. I thought of Melissa's smirk, her arrogance, her belief that she had beaten me, and I felt a spark ignite deep in my chest. She thought she had won, but she had only woken me up. The farmhouse was my key. The community was my ally. The county's redevelopment grants were my weapon. And with every day that passed, my plan began to form, piece by piece, like a quilt I had been stitching my whole life. I would not scream. I would not beg. I would rise. And when I was finished, Melissa and Daniel would regret every cruel word, every insult, every betrayal, because I wasn't going to destroy them with anger. I was going to outshine them with something far more devastating, success. And it all started with the very farmhouse they thought they had stolen from me. The farmhouse. That old, weathered property Melissa had mocked. The land she had stolen with her smug smile. It was about to become the very weapon that undid her. I began quietly. First, I contacted the county office. Evelyn was right. They were launching a redevelopment program. Old properties were being transformed into community centers, libraries, children's programs. Grants were generous, and applicants who could show community support were prioritized. And support? That was one thing I had in abundance. Evelyn helped me organize. Church friends signed petitions. Families whose children I'd once babysat wrote letters. Even the diner I'd worked at held a fundraiser to help me gather initial funds for restoration. The community rallied not just because of the farmhouse, but because of what Melissa and Daniel had done. Word had spread. People were disgusted at the way I'd been treated. While Melissa and Daniel ignored me, believing I had disappeared into irrelevance, I was quietly weaving a net around them. The paperwork wasn't easy, but I forced myself through it. Late nights, stacks of forms, meetings with county officials. They were surprised at my persistence. "Most people your age don't have the patience for this," one clerk remarked. I smiled, but inside I thought, you have no idea what a mother is capable of when she's been betrayed. The breakthrough came 6 weeks later. I received a letter in the mail. "Congratulations, your application has been approved. You are the recipient of a redevelopment grant in the amount of $85,000. My hands trembled as I read it. $85,000, enough to breathe life into the farmhouse, to turn it into something no one could ignore. Construction began almost immediately. Evelyn stood beside me the first day the trucks rolled in. Melissa and Daniel didn't even notice. They rarely drove out that way, and if they did, they probably assumed it was just county work. For months, I watched the transformation. The cracked paint peeled away, replaced by warm, inviting colors. The broken windows were swapped for shining glass. The rotting floorboards became sturdy again, echoing with the sound of workers' boots. A playground rose in the yard, swings and slides painted in bright colors. Inside, we built shelves for books, tables for after-school tutoring, a kitchen for community dinners. It was beautiful. By the time it opened, the farmhouse wasn't just a building anymore. It was a beacon. Families flocked there. Children laughed on the swings. Parents came for classes and workshops. The local news covered it. Local widow restores family farmhouse into community haven. The cameras captured my smile. My story spread. I became, in their words, an inspiration. And that's when Melissa and Daniel noticed. It started with a phone call. Daniel's voice hesitant. "Mom, I saw the article about the farmhouse. You should have told me." I paused, savoring the irony. "Told you? Daniel, I wasn't sure you'd want to hear from me. You've been so busy." There was silence on the line. Then a muttered, "Melissa didn't know. We didn't realize." But I knew they realized now. They realized that the land they'd dismissed, the inheritance they'd stolen, was no longer theirs to mock. It was mine. And I had turned it into something bigger than all of us. Melissa wasn't quiet for long. 2 days later, she stormed into the farmhouse during an open house event. Her heels clicked furiously against the polished floors. People stared as she marched toward me, her face red with rage. "What is this?" she hissed. "How dare you use our property like this?" I looked around at the crowd, dozens of people watching, children, parents, neighbors, everyone who had supported me. I raised my voice, calm but clear. "Our property?" I repeated. Funny, because last I checked, it was the community's now. They built this with me. They kept me standing when you tried to break me. Gasps rippled through the room. Melissa's face twisted. She turned to Daniel, who had followed her in, his face pale. "Daniel, say something. This is ours." But Daniel stayed silent. His eyes darted nervously to the crowd. People were watching, judging. He knew it. I leaned in slightly, my voice low enough for only the front rows to hear. "No, Melissa, this was never yours. You tried to take it from me, but you didn't realize. You can't steal what's in my heart. You can't erase a legacy built with love." Melissa's voice rose, shrill and desperate. "You're making me look like a fool." I tilted my head. "No, Melissa, you did that yourself." The crowd murmured. Some even clapped. Melissa's cheeks burned red as she spun on her heel and stormed out, dragging Daniel behind her. But the damage was done. Her mask had slipped. Everyone saw her for what she truly was. And the humiliation didn't stop there. The local newspaper followed up on the story, this time with a headline that made me smile. "Widow overcomes family betrayal to build community legacy." My words were quoted, my face on the front page. Melissa couldn't stand it. She thrived on control, on appearances. Now she was the villain in everyone's eyes. Daniel tried again, weeks later. He came to the farmhouse quietly, without Melissa. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, watching children read books on the new shelves, families laughing in the kitchen. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. "Mom." I don't know what to say. I looked at him for a long moment. My boy, my betrayer, my son. "You don't need to say anything," I said finally. "Just watch. This is what love builds. Not cruelty, not control. Love." His eyes welled with tears. For the first time in years, I saw the boy he once was flicker across his face. The boy who had clung to my hand. But I didn't rush to forgive him. Not yet. He had chosen silence too many times. He needed to feel the weight of that. Melissa, meanwhile, faded into whispers. She had lost the one thing she craved most, admiration. The community she tried to impress now avoided her. Her name was spoken with contempt. She was no longer the polished, untouchable wife of Daniel. She was the woman who tried to erase a mother and failed. That was my revenge. Not screaming, not fighting, but showing them both that they could not destroy me. I had taken the very thing they stole and turned it into a monument of strength, and every laugh of a child, every clap of a neighbor's hand on my shoulder, every smile in that farmhouse was a nail in the coffin of Melissa's pride. She wanted me erased. Instead, I became unforgettable. The farmhouse glows at night now. Sometimes, when the sun sinks behind the Nevada hills, I sit on the porch and watch the lights flicker on inside, warm, golden, alive. The laughter of children spills into the air, their footsteps pattering across the wooden floors I once thought would rot forever. It's no longer just a building. It's a heartbeat, a promise, proof that even in betrayal, something stronger can rise. I never imagined this would be my ending. For so long, I thought my story was simply about survival. Surviving widowhood, surviving loneliness, surviving my own son's rejection. But it became something greater, something I never expected. People stop me in the street now. "Mrs. Carter," they say, "you've given us something beautiful." Parents hug me, their voices trembling with gratitude. Children call me Grandma, even the ones who aren't mine by blood. The community that once felt distant now feels like family. Do you know what that means to a woman who was told she wasn't welcome anymore? It means everything. Daniel visits sometimes, not often and never with Melissa. He comes quietly, almost ashamed, as if every step toward me is weighted with guilt. He brings little gifts, a pie from the bakery, flowers from the market. He lingers at the doorway before entering, his voice uncertain. "Mom, can I help with anything?" I let him. I let him carry boxes, stack books, sweep the porch. He doesn't know it, but every small act is his apology. Words fail him, but his hands try to make amends. And maybe, in time, I will forgive him fully. But I won't rush. Forgiveness isn't something you hand out like spare change. It has to be earned. Melissa, though, she never comes. Not once. I hear whispers about her. How she complains to friends that I stole her spotlight. How she grows bitter when people praise me at church. She avoids the farmhouse like it's cursed. Maybe it is. Cursed with the truth she can't bear to face. I don't need her apology. Not anymore. My revenge was never about hearing, "I'm sorry." It was about proving I couldn't be erased. And I did. Funny thing is, the farmhouse became more than revenge. It became healing. There's a little girl named Ruby who comes every week. Her father works late, her mother's ill, and she found a safe place here. She curls up in the corner with books and sometimes slips her tiny hand into mine. "Grandma," she whispers, "can you read to me?" Every time my heart swells, because I realize maybe I lost one version of family, but I gained another, bigger, stronger, rooted not in blood but in love. I've also found a strength I didn't know I had. I used to walk with my head down, careful not to upset Melissa, desperate to keep the peace with Daniel. Now I walk tall. I faced humiliation, abandonment, betrayal, and I'm still standing. More than that, I'm thriving. Evelyn teases me sometimes. "Look at you," she says. "Nevada's toughest grandma." We laugh, but deep down I know she's right. Not because I fought with fists or fury, but because I fought with patience, with purpose. I turned pain into power. And maybe that's the lesson in all of this. Betrayal hurts. It cuts deep, especially when it comes from the ones you love most. It can shatter you, leave you gasping for air, wondering if you even matter. But sometimes, betrayal is the very thing that wakes you up. It forces you to find strength you didn't know was buried inside you. Melissa thought she broke me. She thought exile would silence me. But exile gave me freedom. Daniel thought choosing silence would protect his marriage. But his silence cost him his mother's trust. And me? I thought losing everything meant my story was ending. But losing everything was the start of something new. Now, when I look around the farmhouse, I don't see revenge anymore. I see resilience. I see love. I see proof that when life tries to bury you, you can grow roots and rise again, taller than before. Daniel still struggles. I see the guilt in his eyes, the way he lingers just a little too long before saying goodbye. I don't push him away, but I don't cling to him either. That's his journey to walk. My door is open, but not my heart's peace. He has to earn that. Melissa. Well, maybe one day life will humble her enough to see the truth, or maybe it won't. Either way, I no longer care. Her opinion, her approval, her control, none of it holds me anymore, because I've already won. I won the moment the first child laughed in the farmhouse yard. I won the moment the newspaper printed my story, not hers. I won the moment I realized I could live and love without their permission. And if you're listening to my story, wondering if you can survive your own betrayal, hear me when I say this. You can. Not just survive, thrive. Use their cruelty as fuel. Use their rejection as proof you don't need them. Build something so strong, so radiant, that the very people who tried to erase you have no choice but to watch you shine. Because in the end, revenge doesn't always look like fire and fury. Sometimes, the sweetest revenge is peace, joy, a life so full that their shadows can't touch you anymore. That's my story, from the text that shattered me. "You're not welcome tonight. My wife wants space." To the home that now welcomes hundreds, I've walked through hell and come out whole. And every time I sit on this porch, listening to the farmhouse hum with life, I whisper the same words to myself. They tried to erase me, but I became unforgettable. And that is the day I truly won.